Inside the recording studio, I am Jody Whitesides, and with me is...
Hey, Jody.
Yeah?
Jody, can we try a version of that intro again? Can we try to do that a little bit more monotonous? You're kind of doing a lot of pitch things going on there today. Do you think we can try that? Just one more, just to humor me and try to keep it a little bit steadier and a little bit more pronounced.
You mean,
does that work for you?
Well, you mentioned the word monotonous. Do you want me to be monotonous about it, or what? I mean,
no,
what are you
I just
going
don't want
for
you
here?
to be so. Ideally, I'd like to not hear all of those pitch rises and coming back. So keep it within like a little bit more of a range there, so you're not getting the really highs and the really lows. So we try to keep it a little bit steadier there in pitch.
All right,
Can we try that
again? Yeah, I'm fully down with that. Here we go. All right. Hello, and welcome to Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. Is that better?
That's perfect. Awesome,
Sweet.
Jody. Yay!
Hey, so there we have it. We are getting into this episode, which comes to us via a question by one of our Italian listeners, and I'm hoping I'm going to say this name correctly. I know the first name is Fabio, at least I think that's how it's pronounced, and the last name is, I want to say, Zorzi. Does that seem like the correct pronunciation of an Italian last name?
Yeah,
Fabio Sorsi.
Yeah, and if we're butchering,
if we're mangling your name,
sorry, Fabio.
Yes, we're very sorry if we have mangled your name, but we appreciate the fact that you wrote to us and said, "Hey, could you please define the difference between a producer, or the role of a producer, and the role of a mixing engineer?" And here we are. We've just entered the episode with an example of what a producer would do.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question, I think. And it's one of those, you and I have been, through some of the podcasts here, really sort of anal about old school definitions of what things should be. I mean, when we talked about buses and auxes and things like that. So these days, it's certainly there are certainly some blurred lines when it comes to these things. And people tend to use words for roles that may not be super applicable for the history of the general term, right? So
exactly. So let's kick this off and start by asking, what is a producer? Okay. And let's start with the classical definition in terms of the music industry, which is kind of parallel a little bit to the movie industry, although the producer role in the music industry is a little bit more than what the producer is in film. And I would say that even in film, the term producer has gotten blurred as well. And there's a specific reason for that in film. I'm not so sure there's a specific reason for that in music.
Yeah. Well, let's not blur the lines even more and start adding more elements to the. So do you want, what's your sort of definition of a producer in the musical sense?
The definition
what's
of
a classic, producer.
Definition of what a producer is. The classical definition that I would take away from what music was before it started having those blurred lines of what a producer actually does is they are the omnipotent presence, so to speak, with the band and other elements to the recording, in that they start with the band, working with the band, figuring out the songs, hiring the various people that are needed in the recording process, and taking them from the stage of them having their songs and bringing them all the way to final product. That, to me, is what a classical sense of a producer is. And the producer oversees the budget. They oversee hiring of the arranger, the recording engineer or engineers, the mixing engineer or engineers, the mastering engineer or engineers, the PAs, the location of where things are going to be recorded. And to top it off, they sit in the studio with the band, helping them to make appropriate decisions about the arrangement. If they have hired an arranger, or if the band doesn't need an arranger, they help with that concept by overseeing how everything is flowing piece by piece. That is the classic definition, in my mind, of what a producer actually does. They help that artist focus the vision for the music, hire all the people needed to make that happen, and keep everything on track when things get lost from their original focus. Would that be a good definition right there? Did I state that well?
Yeah, I would agree to all of that just about, right? I think I like to look at it as, just as you said there, the producer is generally the overseer of the project.
Yes.
They're the ones that are responsible for making sure that the album gets made within the certain amount of budget that they have. And then, as you mentioned, the overseer of arrangements and things like that, that can vary a little bit dependent on sort of like the personality of the producer. Because there's certain people they have, okay, well, I have this creative vision for what we're going to do with this product, this band in this case. And a lot of times, like you said, that will be with a discussion with the bands, like, is this what you conceive your music being? If those visions are, not in unison, so to speak, then it's probably not the right producer for the gig, right?
Sure.
But they're the ones that help there, and certain producers get involved with songwriting and structure and flow of the record, that kind of thing, and certain don't. Certain producers have more of a hands-off kind of thing, and I think they're in sort of like the rock genre. There's two examples that we can give where there's somebody like a Mutt Lange who's really, really involved in
the songwriting and the
songs
arrangement,
and recordings, and the writing
to a very anal degree.
Absolutely, and. It'd be hard to argue with his results either. But then again, not everybody uses that as their template. And you could have somebody like Rick Rubin, for example, who's, by all accounts, shows up and go, oh, yeah, this is a cool vibe. You should be focusing on that vibe. Do more of this. See you in 2 weeks type of thing. So, and again, it's like, if that's the way you like to work, awesome. Because again, it'd be hard to argue with his results, right?
Yes.
But that's generally the role of a producer. Make sure that sort of like you said, what did you say? The omnipotent being on top of everything there. That's kind of like, okay, well, this is the vision that we're going to do, and this is how we're going to achieve it.
Sure. And then, of course, the band has to trust that the producer is going to keep that vision in focus, and if they stray from that focus, they should hopefully have enough trust that if the producer comes back and goes, you're losing focus, we need to bring it back in, you need to do this, you need to do that, that they'll take him at his word, or him or her, depending on the producer, and take that feedback and get back on track, so to speak. That's the clear thing here. Now, I'm thinking, if you don't have that, was John Kolodner, is he a producer as well? Was he a producer, or is he just a record exec?
No, I think he was just the A&R guy, but I remember it's actually kind of funny. I think because a lot of times on his
credits, it's like John Kolodner. What did he do? He's John Kolodner.
Yeah, he had his own credit. Like, this is what I do. I do John Kolodner. That's what I do.
Right. I can't remember if he was a producer or not, but if he was, that's the funniest producing credit
I think
ever.
he worked for Geffen, as far as I'm concerned, for I think a big chunk of his career anyway. And I think he was essentially an A&R, but he was the liaison, right?
Sure.
But he was like the guy for a while there, right? For a good decade in late 80s, early 90s, right? He was involved in a lot of
big projects,
records.
And then yes, when you look at the credits, it's like John Kolodner : John Kolodner.
Yeah.
So sidetrack. Let's get away from that. All right.
Yeah,
so
let's do it. I was saying that it's a little bit like another sidetrack, and then we'll steer it back on. It's kind of like a 7#9 chord is known as like the Hendrix chord.
Sure.
So you're that's when you know you made it.
That's right. So that kind of gets through that's the definition of what a classical sense of a producer is. Now, that being said, not all producers would know every aspect to the job, but they would know to hire the right people for the job that would hopefully gel well with the whole situation going on. If they didn't, they'd probably get on the phone or send an email or a text and say, boom, you're fired. And then hire somebody else that can get the job done. So that's the classical sense of what a producer does. Some still do this.
Yeah.
So, but now let's switch gears for a moment and let's talk about the role of the recording, or no, actually not the recording engineer, because he asked specifically about mixing engineers. So,
yeah, but I think it's important to do, even if we do like a quick aside to this, I think it's important to bring up the recording engineer.
Okay.
And the reason I think that is because if you are the producer and you're being in this sort of creative state where you're focused on everything as a whole, you may not want to get into the minutia of thinking about, okay, well, which mics are we going to use when we mic the drum kit? Or are we going to use these pre's? Are we going to do that? Where are we going to do the low cut on all these sort of like technical tasks that you have? You don't want to go in and out of those.
That is the job of the recording engineer. Right. That is correct.
Right. Yeah. So the producer would say, hey, we want to get this kind of sound.
We want to sound more yellow.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Have you heard that, the Peter McGeehan thing or whatever? Sure. Yeah. But yeah, so it would be the recording engineer's job to be that gear guy, the problem solver. When something is not working in the studio, you're the one that fixes that during the tracking stage. And that would be the recording engineer.
Yes. So
I think that's an important distinction. We all know that when we're perhaps working on our own material, that we're trying to be creative, to have to go and troubleshoot something is just, it can grind that creative flow to do a dead screeching halt. Right?
Sure.
So that's why a lot of times the producer would not do that. They would have a recording engineer doing all of that. So Next up,
before we hit the mixing engineer stage, let's take a brief pause for our sponsor to say a word or two. All right, let's get on with the mixing engineer definition. How would you define what a mixing engineer does, Chris?
Well, that's sort of like the last part of the creative process before mastering, right? So while the producer might have a vision for this is how I want this album to sound, along with a band, now everything is recorded, everything is tracked, whether this is to tape or if this is,
direct to vinyl, digital,
whatever format it is, right? It's somebody's task to mix this. And
not if it's direct to vinyl, but yeah.
I'm sorry?
Not if it's direct to vinyl, which I inserted in there.
Well, yeah, direct to vinyl. Well, yeah.
That'd be mixed on the way in, but yeah.
Yeah. How often does that happen anymore?
Probably
Unless
not
your name is Jack White, But to then, mix the album. And again, it can be beneficial that if you are, sometimes it might be the recording engineer and the producer that mix the album together, but it's a good opportunity to give it to another party at this point that has a fresh set of ears and that has had that discussion with the producer generally of this is the vision for the project, make it happen.
Sure.
So there's somebody else that comes in, and more often than not, I would say at this point, is specializing in mixing, where I'm thinking of, oh my God, well, what the heck? Now the name
brain
escapes
fart.
me.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, complete brain. It will. Bob Clearmountain.
Yes.
I think was sort of like the first guy that really specialized in that. And he's done production stuff as well. But I think at this point he realizes or says that This is what he's best at, and this is what he enjoys doing the most. So you have guys like that, and then, you know, Chris Lord-Alge, and there's a bunch of guys that are, at least in my world, more known for their mixing credits than anything else. So that's that stage of the mixing. And as a mixing engineer, where you're kind of, okay, here's your, thanks for recording all those tracks really, really well. Now I'm going to put the polish on this and bring it up another couple of levels. That's what I'm thinking. Not levels as in volume, but in quality.
Sure.
So that's what I think of the role of the mixing engineer.
And I'll take it a step
Anything
further.
You want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll take it a little bit further, in that the mixing engineer becomes the person in front of the mixing board or the DAW control center, whatever it is. They're the ones that are the hands-on, moving the knobs, tweaking the settings, that kind of thing, and making the overall decisions, initial decisions, I should say, of how the mix is going. The producer and or the band would also be present at times. Not all, I mean, sometimes they could be present 100% of the time. Sometimes they might just fop it off on somebody else and just say, here, deal with it, and just be happy with whatever the end result is. However, I look at it from the standpoint of that mixing engineer is the guy that is turning the knobs, moving the faders, making choices about reverbs and all that kind of stuff. And with the producer being the overseer, they can generally be yay or nay, or let's try this, let's try that kind of thing until they get a happy result. That's where I would see that difference, is that the mixing engineer is more like, you know, the guy that is doing the hands-on work of the actual mix.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I didn't explain that very well, but that, yes,
right.
That's obviously
I know you were going there, but
you,
I just kind of took it all the way to the end with the train station.
No, and it's, yeah, but it's also something to kind of keep in mind that when we're thinking of being that mix engineer, that you're no longer, or you're certainly not just pleasing one person.
Right.
You have sort of like that three-headed monster that you got to, like if there's a label involved, they have to be happy.
Sure.
The producer has to be happy, and ideally the artist needs to be happy as well.
Right.
And they don't always have the same view for what it should sound like.
Correct.
Right? So then but I
would also, you mentioned the label, and I will step in and say that the producer is actually like the liaison between the mix engineer and the label. In that regard, he's the one that is dealing with the communication of like, well, the labels come back saying we need to do this. And then he'll go back to the mix engineer and say, this is what we need to have happen. And then the mix engineer can come back and say, well, I can't make that happen, or lovely, let's make that happen. And then he'll do it. The producer will then take the new result of what's just been happening based on the feedback and go back to the label. So the producer is essentially like that guy that not only the overseer, but the communications director between all the different parties is essentially what that producer role is.
Yeah.
So that is the very big difference between the classical sense of what the role of a producer and the role of the mix engineer in the process of recording, whether it's a single or an album, what have you, that kind of thing. So now with the modern sense of these things, those lines are getting blurred pretty heavily. And you get guys running around saying, I'm a producer. And what do? They're making beats. Well, yeah, you're a beat producer, but you're not necessarily a record producer in that sense. That's what I would end up saying in that. And I'm sure that's going to piss some people off, but unfortunately that's reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's probably, I've known people that have said that in the same thing. And I tend to be, this is going to be a shock to you, Jody, but I tend to be pretty anal with my definitions.
You don't say.
Because I'm old and I'm stubborn. But people say, I produce. Well, I think the definition comes from their point of view, is that I'm creating something.
Right.
Okay, but that's not necessarily what a producer is in my eyes. You might be all of those things, right? And I think some of that probably comes from, because it tends to be more in in the rap or the hip hop world when you hear these kind of definitions.
Yes.
And it's not that it's wrong, it just has originally a different
connotation,
meaning.
Yeah.
Right. So, but when you see guys who, you know, let's say going back to guys like Dr. Dre and stuff that arguably made that explode. Right.
Sure.
So I think that's where it comes from. But if you're not overseeing the whole thing, you're technically not a producer, right?
Right.
In my world, anyway. That's probably a contentious issue, but there, I said it.
Well, and I will jump on your bandwagon, so to speak, to agree with that statement. So, can there be more than one producer on a project? Sure. Is it advantageous? Maybe, depending on the size of the artist. And the scope of what's going on.
What they do,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
So there are finer definitions if we want to take a moment and step into that. So let's say we take an artist like Rihanna, who's pretty globally well known. She has probably an executive producer who is the point of the whole situation, the top of the food chain, so to speak. And then beyond that, there will be a vocal producer, a track producer, you know, and various other things. And the reason why I say that is because there are people who are specializing in getting a very good vocal take out of an artist. And their whole gig is, I produce the vocals, meaning they're the ones making the choice on what way the artist sang or said something in a take, as the choice of like, that's going to go in this particular comp kind of thing, or this is the take that we're going to use kind of thing. That would be the role of a vocal producer if the executive producer is not there doing that. So there are other producer type roles, and there are hierarchies to how that would work. But for most artists who are especially not at the level of, say, a Taylor Swift or a Rihanna or Beyonce or Jay-Z or some other huge male artist like Ed Sheeran or something, you're probably not working with multiple producers in that sense. Now, in each of those artists, a vast majority of the time, they have 10 different mixing engineers because everybody's mixing one or two tracks on the entire album that's going to be coming out, and they're trying to get everything done in a timely fashion. So they're going to have multiple mix engineers. They're going to have multiple producers working on everything around this artist. So that's a whole different ballgame in the grand scheme of how most artists are going to work. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think it's sort of funny. I just thought of this right now while we have this sort of proliferation of like mantling more roles than having, you know, the on the top level it would be the producer and then the engineers and so forth, and throw in songwriters there somewhere.
Sure.
And artists and stuff. It seems like we're in a point where there's even more and more specialization as well. Like you mentioned,
there can be, yes.
I'm the vocal producer, or let's bring in a guy who does amazing work with the editing for whatever part, right? So you have all of these specialized roles, and it's kind of interesting as opposed to just a main guy now. But at the same time, all these lines are blurred as well. So maybe that's all part of the whole soup of the music industry at this point.
Well, but there's always been specialized roles, and there's also been like assistants to engineers, and then they have like first engineer, second engineer, assistant to the second engineer, assistant to the first engineer. So those kind of things happen, and it's the same kind of thing that can happen also with producers, which is why I went to go and mention that you might have an executive producer on a very big artist, and then you have various other producers underneath doing certain roles of producing per song or per album kind of thing, where you have a vocal producer, you have a music track producer kind of thing, who are overseeing the different elements of something that's very grand in scale, very big for the big artists. But for those of you who are working out of your house and you're trying to get your feet wet and get everything going, you might be wearing all those hats. And it's possible to do it, but for most people, it's a very difficult task to take on, to understand the differences between the roles and to do each one of them effectively, I think. That's my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, I think so, because it is, you have to go through all of those during the process there. So let's say that you're now attempting to be three things. You might be the recording engineer, you're the artist, and you're the producer as well. So trying to keep that objectivity can be very difficult.
Yes.
And I think one reason both you and I, at least for me, I started using mixed templates and very much separating that aspect of it. Here's the creation part, and then later on going into this is now I'm a mixing engineer. Now I'm doing this.
Yes.
I'm not making creative decisions in the structure of the song or anything like that. That's already done.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm mixing. So for me, that helps me sort of like clear those roles for myself when I'm doing that, and I can be in a certain mindset.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's definitely a good way to look at it if you are the one-man band, so to speak, and you are working on all aspects of things, of going from a tracking template to a mixing template to a mastering template if you're going to take on the role of mastering your own stuff. So, and then again, it's the same sort of thing if you go and put on your creativity hat and say, where am I going with all of this music or this song that I wish to create? You know, if you're trying to keep a track on your own artistic vision, then in a sense, you're kind of being your own producer. If you're keeping yourself on that track, if you're constantly shifting and shuffling and second guessing and going, oh, is this better? Is this not better? Or should I do this? And then I go off in this direction and I keep going there and I get lost from this vision that's over here. Yeah, it becomes a problem because you never get anything done, for one. And two, it might become an absolute mess in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one thing that can help with that, if we are in that situation, it can be very helpful to have working relationships with people that you trust.
Yeah, you have to trust the people you're working with. If you don't, it's never going to be a fun
But when
ending.
you can, and when you can go, hey, take a listen to this song I wrote. It's just a demo. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and yeah, that sounds great. Or, yeah, you know what, that's really cool, but the second verse is way too long. You need to shorten that out. Maybe double the chorus the second time, or the hook, or whatever it happens to be. So there are, ways of going about it. But the hardest part, I think, is the loss of objectivity during the creative part, when we're doing all of this stuff ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it helps to bounce things off of people. And then if you have the benefit of doing it like somebody like a Mutt Lange, where he's got, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of albums he has his name on, but in the sales column, that is. But that's somebody you would trust, right? So
sure.
Most of us don't have the benefit of doing that. Now, one thing I want to say, though, before we go on and probably start putting like a bow on this, is when we both mentioned there that somebody who is, in our views, a beat maker, yes, rather than technically a producer.
From a classical sense.
It doesn't mean, from a classical sense, and this is important, mm-hmm, it does not mean, at least to me, and I can speak for you here as well, it doesn't mean that is a lesser of a role.
No, it isn't.
Than the producer. It's not. It's just a definition, right? So what this person is doing, it doesn't mean it. It's not like it demean anything. Oh, you're just a beat maker. No, you're a beat maker. Be that proud. Yes. We're just talking about definitions here. So right. I just wanted to get that out of the way, that it's not like, oh, he's fucking old rock guys who's looking down at it. That's not it at all.
Yeah, I wasn't attempting to like belittle somebody who calls himself a producer who's really only making beats. It's just a matter of your definition's a little bit skewed, in my opinion.
Right.
So, and my opinion does not make fact, but it does fall in line with what has generally been the opinion and how things have worked in a long-standing sense.
Right.
In the industry, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's just, the benefit of having all these gray hairs in my beard. It's just been around a minute,
so what you're saying is you don't use Just for Men?
No, I don't. No, not yet. Give me a couple of years. So there.
Anything else? Hopefully that wraps it up for you, Fabio. That we have hopefully unblurred those lines and helped you get that definition. And for everybody else that's listening to the episode that we're dedicating to Fabio, thank you for listening, because we appreciate it.
Thank you, Fabio, and thank you for writing in. That was actually a really good question.
It was a fantastic question. So that being said, while not so much that, let's get on with our Friday finds. What have you found this week, Chris?
Well, I was thinking about this, as I tend to do. We just came into the new year.
Yes.
And time for most people do a lot of resolutions and think, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start working out, and I'm going to start being more productive in the studio, and I'm going to learn how to wrap my cables properly, or whatever it happens to be. Right?
I'd love to wrap my cables properly, damn it.
Yeah. Where we essentially set ourselves up to fail with a lot of these because we take on too much and we're really gung-ho and we burn ourselves out.
Yep.
So at the moment, I'm pretty big on trying to be better with my mental health and that kind of thing.
Good on you.
And yeah, I'm trying. And there is a book I am about to wrap up, and it's called Atomic Habits.
Ooh, sounds very futuristic.
It does, right? But it's essentially about how to set manageable goals and to be able to reach them instead of overreaching. And it's all about taking small steps that in the long run make a huge impact in your life. So not to waffle on about it too much, but it's a good read, and it's certainly food for thought. So if you're one of those people that I think most of us are, if we're honest, we might need a little help on certain issues to be more creative or be more organized or all of that. Atomic Habits.
Atomic Habits. And who's the author of that?
Yep.
Do you know?
I do know, but I'd have to go and get my book, and I'm not going to do that.
Sorry, author.
Actually,
well, actually, you know what we'll
here
do?
we go.
Okay.
No, I'll just no. Actually, you know what? But while I look up the author, you tell us your Friday find.
Okay, my Friday find is coming from the land of analog, the analog world, so to speak. For the vast majority of this, I am going to be talking about the SSL's newest mixing board, and it is called the Duality Fusion. And they're already making them. There are people that are already buying them. Even though I have since said in the past, I don't do that analog shit anymore. That is,
and it's not like that quote was taken out of context.
It's not like that was taken out of context.
On purpose.
Exactly. The reality is that there are certain times when you would rather work on a board than when you would rather work on a DAW. And one of those times is like when you're tracking big things and you want to have a specific sound dedicated, which is why you'd build a studio around a mixing board, or in this case, the SSL Duality Fusion. And what makes the SSL Duality Fusion really, really cool is that it is based off of the SSL 9000J, but it is modernized in that it sounds even better and can open up even wider, so to speak, on the top end, which is why we know that you bought that plugin, was it a week ago or so?
I did, yes.
And really like sang its praises like, wah! And what makes the Fusion stand out even from past SSL boards and even the J9000 or the 9000J, I'm not sure which way that's actually said, is the Fusion panel strip, which is in the center of the console. And what the Fusion panel strip has is 4 sections to it. And those sections include a vintage drive, which is kind of like a way to get additional oomph into your mix on the overall thing. It also has a separate EQ section that can, what's the best way of saying it? It gives the EQ section different, I believe, different variants to the drive of how the EQ works when you're actually working with the rest of the board. And then it has a special compression section as well. And in addition to that, it has the ability to deal with the stereo image control and how wide you want to get it. Oh, and I'm forgetting the fact that
that's
part
cool.
of the, yeah, it's very cool. And you can set it and then it kind of just relates to the overall mix, I believe. And one thing I forgot about the vintage drive, it's actually based upon and I know this is probably not the best way to say this, but it is based upon emulating transformers.
Okay.
Which SSL is not known for. Because people like instantly assume, oh, it's super clean, it's this, it's that, and they've never actually technically used transformers within their gear as far as was that how it was explained to me? I'm trying to go a little bit by memory because I didn't take all the notes. And essentially you can choose a couple of different transformers to color the sound, so to speak. So you can get
different colors.
Yeah, you can add different colors on the vintage drive using. So essentially that the vintage drive thing is emulating various transformers.
Right. That sounds really, really cool. So different colors and stuff.
Yeah, so you can add different colors via like this transformer thing. And then you can essentially set some user type presets to save for that kind of thing. Oh.
Very cool.
And to be on the completely outside of reality kind of mark, if you remember the game Simon, do you remember that electronic game? It was like a little circular thing with the four different things of color and then and then you were supposed to play back the same thing that it would do.
Right.
The Fusion panel will play a game if you want to do that of Simon. For whatever reason.
Most expensive game
the most
of
expensive
Simon
game
ever.
you can ever buy.
Right. Well, that sounds like an impressive console there.
Yes, it does. And my reality is that should I go back to building another studio, this is the top choice on my
console
list right now. That I would go for.
So my apologies to Mr. Clear. James Clear is the author of Atomic Habits.
James Clear. All right, cool. Atomic Habits. Go check that out. So there you go. That is this week's Friday Finds. It is the Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it is the Fusion Duality or the Duality Fusion by SSL, the big 48 channel. I think it comes in 24 and 48, but the 48. Why go 24 when you can go 48?
There you go.
So
it's twice as many.
Exactly. It's twice as much. So while we still have your attention, we would like to invite you to go to our website and leave us a review at insidetherecordingstudio.com/review, because that does help us and it does help the podcast. And we certainly appreciate it if you do that kind of thing. Plus, if you do it, please let us know and maybe we'll send you a thank you or something more. And on top of that, just go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. You'll get weekly reminders about our tips, and we'll make sure that you don't miss any future episodes. In addition to that, if you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for the email list, you'll get some presets for some Slate plugins and from Universal Audio plugins from Chris and I, because we're just those kind of guys. We'll give you something for being a part of our list. In addition to that, if you send us an email to goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the word producer, you might just get something fun back in your email. Plus, if you have a topic suggestion that you would love for Chris and I to pontificate upon in a future episode, contact us via our contact form on our website at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com. God, how many times can I say that in one ending? I feel like I've said it like 100 times already. And you will be able to send us that message and say, hey, would you guys please talk about this? Just like today's episode for Fabio Zorzi. So thank you very much. I'm going to say sayonara until Tuesday for the Tuesday tip, and sayonara until Friday for next Friday's episode. So, Chris, have a good day.
Have a good one, Jody. Talk to you later.
Yep, and everybody out there, you guys have a fantastic day too.
Thanks for listening.